Hi everyone, I'm here today to introduce the St. Mary Canal Modernization Project Watershed Plan Environmental Impact Statement. This is a virtual recording of a public presentation that was given in Babb, Montana, Havre, Montana, and Malta, Montana on July 13th and July 18th. And this online virtual recording is meant to provide information for those individuals who are not able to attend these public meetings in person. This project is sponsored by the Milk River Joint Board of Control with cooperation from the National Resources Conservation Service, the Bureau of Reclamation, and is supported by HDR Engineering and Farmers Conservation Alliance, or FCA. My name is Megan Christian. I'm with FCA and I'm here to introduce the project. This presentation is split into two parts. The first part will overview the watershed planning process, the PL 566 program, and will also provide an overview of the St. Mary Canal infrastructure and the Milk River project itself. And then part two will just go over how to submit a comment about this project as part of our public scoping period. Okay, so let's first focus on the project overview, and then we'll move into the watershed planning process and the PL 566 program. While this watershed plan EIS is focusing on a subset of the Milk River Project's infrastructure, the St. Mary Canal, and the associated infrastructure with that canal, we wanted to provide a quick overview of the Milk River Project as a whole. So the Milk River Project, as I'm sure a lot of you listening to this recording know, is owned and operated by the Bureau of Reclamation. The project sponsor for this watershed plan EIS is the Milk River Joint Board of Control, who approached NRCS and requested to pursue modernization of the St. Mary Canal. One of the reasons why the Joint Board is pursuing modernization of the St. Mary Canal is because it's a crucial piece of infrastructure for the Milk River Project as a whole, and is the way where water is taken from the St. Mary River, delivered via the St. Mary Canal into the Milk River, which is then allows that water to be delivered to the rest of the Milk River Project. As a bit more some facts and details about the Milk River Project as a whole, it supplies water to around 120,000 acres, those 8 irrigation districts that are represented by the Milk River Joint Board of Control, the Blackfeet Indian Reservation, over 8,000 private irrigators, several municipalities, as well as the Boudouin National Wildlife Refuge. Here we have a general figure that shows the Milk River Project as a whole. This figure was developed by the Bureau of Reclamation. On the left-hand side, you can see the St. Mary Canal infrastructure, which is what this project will focus on. And again, it just forms the beginning of the project where water from the St. Mary River is taken, delivered via the St. Mary Canal, and delivered to the Milk River. The Milk River then goes up into Canada and then comes back down to deliver water to the rest of the project. Here's a more zoomed in view of that St. Mary Canal and its associated infrastructure. The beginning of the St. Mary Canal, or the intake of the project, is around in the vicinity of Babb, Montana. The canal then goes north and east before delivering water to the Milk River around where you see the Drop 5 end project. And so this is what this Watershed Plan Environmental Impact Statement will focus on, this piece of infrastructure. So now we come to the project's purpose and need. The identified purpose for why the Milk River Joint Board of Control, NRCS, Reclamation, are pursuing modernization of the St. Mary's Canal is to improve agricultural water management. The need for federal funding is because the St. Mary Canal system currently has inadequacies that don't allow it to efficiently and effectively deliver water to the rest of the Milk River Project. This purpose of the project and the need for federal funding is what will drive forward the various proposed alternatives and analyses that will be included in the plan EIS. And these will all refer back to the purpose and the need of this project. Here we have an example of why this project is needed, as it was referred to in the last slide. So both of these photos are of the failure of drop 5 that occurred back in 2020. This was a really catastrophic event that ended up restricting water deliveries to the rest of the Milk River project due to this failure. And so this is just demonstration of the inadequacies of the current infrastructure and the potential for infrastructure failure that demonstrates the true need for this project. So on the last slide, we saw the failure of drop 5, which in association with drop 2, both of these drops were replaced in 2020 due to either failure, as in the case of drop 5, or potential failure in the case of drop 2. There are many other pieces of infrastructure that have not been replaced, that have not been upgraded, that desperately need it. So on the top left-hand corner, we see a significant siphon leak in the Halls Coulee siphon. There are multiple slide areas where landslides are or are threatening to significantly hurt the infrastructure. And the St. Mary Canal itself is also experiencing aging and other issues that don't allow it to effectively and efficiently deliver water. So again, these are just reiterating the need for this modernization of the St. Mary Canal project. So on the slide are some potential benefits that could occur and that the sponsor, the Joint Board of Control, is hoping will occur with modernization of the St. Mary's Canal. These include, again, going back to that project purpose, improving irrigation water management and delivery reliability, echoing that purpose that was stated of improving agricultural water management for the project. There's hope to improve drought resilience, so more efficient and effective delivery of water will allow the Milk River project as a whole to become more resilient to drought conditions. The next would be restoring historic flows for the St. Mary's Canal. So currently, due to limitations of the infrastructure itself, only 600 CFS currently runs through the canal and its infrastructure. The hope is to restore the historic water right of 850 CFS and allow the infrastructure to handle that historic water capacity. Next would be reducing operations and maintenance costs. The infrastructure is aging, and it is aging quickly and more rapidly every year. And so this requires a significant investment in operations and maintenance. And so the hope would be modernization and upgrading of the infrastructure would significantly reduce the efforts and costs related to operating and maintaining it. And finally, reducing that risk of infrastructure failure. So as we saw with the failure of drop 5 that caused so many issues for the Milk River project as a whole, many other pieces of infrastructure do carry also that risk of potential failure. And so with this project, the goal would be to reduce that risk by improving, updating the St. Mary Canal and its infrastructure. So now I'm going to hand it over to Rob Molachek. He's the NRCS state engineer for the state here in Montana, and he's going to go over the PL 566 program and kind of the process through which the Milk River Joint Board of Control is pursuing funding through that program.
As mentioned, my name is Rob Molachek. I work for the Natural Resource Conservation Service out of our state office in Bozeman, Montana. I am the state conservation engineer for NRCS and also the program manager for our watershed programs. I'm going to provide a quick overview of our watershed protection and flood prevention program, commonly referred to as our PL 566 program. This is the program that we are applying and using to implement the St. Mary's Improvement Project. The PL 566 program is primarily focused on large capital improvement projects. The scope involves about 25 million or greater construction costs for these types of projects. The emphasis can be on many project purposes. However, here in Montana, we have decided to focus our PL 566 program on aging irrigation infrastructure, specifically with the intent of improving agricultural water management. For the St. Mary's Canal project, the scope of the project involved the canal, specifically the canal and all the associated structures, which includes the siphons and the drop structures. This is a priority project for NRCS here in Montana, given the amount of folks that benefit from this project and the need for improvement given the age of the infrastructure. Some of the general requirements for our PL 566 program for number one involves we have to work with the local sponsor, a sponsor that has control and oversees the infrastructures we're trying to improve. This is a little different than our other NRCS programs where we would work specifically one-on-one with landowners. For the Watershed program, specifically 566, we need a local sponsor. And how this works is we apply for funding and we receive funding and then get into an agreement with the sponsor. In this case, it's the Milk River Joint Board of Control. The sponsor then is responsible for doing the planning and the environmental analysis. The Joint Board has hired 2 consultants to help write this plan EIS. That is the Farmers Conservation Alliance and HDR. So they're scoped at completing this plan EIS that hopefully will come to a preferred alternative on the selected improvements we want to do to the canal. So that's where we're starting. We're starting with the plan EIS, and this is part of that process. The other requirement is as we get through this plan and get through a preferred alternative, then we would go into design and then hopefully get through design and start construction. One requirement from the sponsor is also to provide some matching funds to support our funding as part of the construction. Another requirement specifically to the project is that it has to address a specific authorized purpose. There are 8 purposes that can be addressed through PL 566. But as mentioned in the earlier slide, our focus here is in Montana is addressing agricultural water management, which directly applies to the St. Mary's Canal. Another requirement is that 20% of the benefits have to be for rural and agricultural communities, which is not an issue here for St. Mary's. One other requirement doesn't specifically apply to the St. Mary's project, but if we are building any flood control structures, we have some capacity limitations in terms of storage and acre feet capacity. One thing I did mention earlier in the previous slide is that typically these projects are up to 25 million. If they go over 25 million, they require congressional approval. But we anticipate the St. Mary's project is going to well exceed 25 million. And that's one of the reasons that we're doing an EIS. So why are we here today? As we know, it is critical to have a successful plan EIS. We need feedback and collaboration through the stakeholders that are impacted by the project. Without stakeholder engagement and feedback, the likelihood of getting to the best alternative is unlikely. Therefore, the intent of these scoping meetings is to collaborate with you as stakeholders and to gather information from you relative to the project study area, any environmental considerations, social considerations, economic considerations that you might have. This is also governed through our NEPA process and governed through the alternative analysis that we have to do through what we call PRNG, our guidance for principles, requirements, and guidelines for water resource projects. So again, it is critical that we get your feedback so that we get the best plan EIS. So listed here are the principles that we look at in evaluating each of the proposed alternatives to improve St. Mary's Canal. The first one here is healthy and resilient ecosystems. We want to make sure that we're not having any effect on ecosystem function. So we look at that. We also look at sustainable economic development to evaluate the sustainability of economic activity and associate cost with each alternative relative to the benefits. We also look at floodplain functions, trying to minimize any residual loss to floodplain function. We look at public safety that evaluates the risk to people, including life and injury to property and essential public services. We also look at environmental justice to ensure that all alternatives ensure that there's a fair treatment to all people. And the last one, we apply the watershed approach. We need to ensure that we look at and recognize upstream and downstream impacts relative to this water resource project. So that's the framework in terms of our alternative analysis, and also it gives you an idea of what kind of feedback we're looking from our stakeholders. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Megan, who's with the Farmers Conservation Alliance, who will provide you kind of an overview of the planning process and some of the preliminary alternatives that we are looking at.
All right, so Rob just went through the PL 566 program, kind of what that entails on a programmatic level. And so I wanted to go into more what are the step-by-step pieces of the watershed planning process. So first, step one, project proposal initiation. So this is when the Milk River Joint Board of Control approached NRCS, was, saying that they would like to pursue modernization of the St. Mary Canal. NRCS determined that the Joint Board was an eligible sponsor and was eligible to pursue funding through PL 566, and so awarded them funding in order to develop a watershed plan environmental impact statement. So that brings us to step two, the scoping period, which is what we are in right now. And this involves soliciting feedback from the public before the development of the draft plan EIS in order to get public input and feedback into what should be considered before drafting that initial watershed plan environmental impact statement. As part of the scoping period, we held 3 in-person scoping meetings in Babb, Havre, and Malta, Montana, in order to invite folks to hear this presentation that you're hearing now and receive and give feedback, receive information about the project, and then provide us feedback. When scoping period closes, which was August 7th of this year, then we'll move into drafting the plan EIS. Once that plan is drafted, we'll move then again into the public comment period, which is where the public will have another chance to comment. The plan EIS will be, the draft plan EIS will be published for the public to be able to read in its entirety, to review, and to submit comments. Again, as a part of this public comment period, there will be multiple public meetings held in order to give folks a chance to hear more details about the content included in the draft plan EIS, and also have a chance to comment and provide feedback about that. Once that public comment period concludes, those public feedback will be incorporated into the plan to produce a final plan EIS. If NRCS considers the plan to be good to go, they'll develop a record of decision, or a ROD, which is then submitted to Congress for approval and authorization. If Congress were to approve the plan EIS, then the Milk River Joint Board of Control would be eligible to receive federal funding and would be allowed to use that federal funding to pursue modernization of the St. Mary Canal. Now that we've covered the overview of the PL 566 program and also the general watershed planning process, along with some of the underlying requirements of this process and this program, let's dive into actually, we've been talking about what is a watershed plan environmental impact statement, or the plan EIS. Let's dive into actually what is included in this document. So the first is the purpose and need, which I went over previously. The purpose just being why the Milk River Joint Board of Control is pursuing funding, and the need being why the why that funding is needed in order to pursue these actions and push the project forward. Next, we have evaluation of the alternatives. So all alternatives are a broad array of actions that could accomplish that purpose and need, or in this case are a broad array of actions that could be included in a proposed project. These are then evaluated based on whether they meet that purpose and need that is identified early on in the plan EIS. And then these are kind of filtered down, kind of going to the bottom of that list into what we call the proposed action, or a more detailed description of potential projects that could accomplish that purpose and need, and in our case, accomplish the modernization of the St. Mary's Canal. Once we have that proposed action, and it's much more of a proposed project, then we'd look at the affected resources of that project. So the way this is done is you take an existing condition, or essentially a baseline of those resources. So those resources would be various resources such as the ones listed here, like vegetation, water, wildlife, cultural resources, would be evaluated on how they exist before a project would occur. Again, we call this the existing condition. And then this would be compared to the potential effects that the project could have on these resources post-project, during project implementation, and also post-project implementation. And so you get this snapshot of before the proposed project and after the proposed project, what are the potential effects on those various resources from these proposed actions. And then finally, we just have those PRNG analyses that Rob discussed earlier, and these can include the ecosystem services, economic analyses, and looking at various trade-offs for resources as well. All right, so now we get to some of the exciting pieces, or what alternatives are being considered in the plan EIS. Again, just to reiterate, alternatives are just some proposed actions that could potentially fulfill that purpose and need of the project. So we have 3 alternatives that are currently and will potentially be considered in the plan EIS. But again, one of the reasons that we're here today is to hear feedback from you all regarding the alternatives that are being considered and the actions included in those alternatives. And so pay attention here, because we would love to hear your feedback and your thoughts regarding these alternatives that we are currently considering. So the first one here is alternative 1, and what we consider or is known as our no action alternative. And so this is essentially the future scenario that includes no federal investment. So if no federal investment were to occur, the Milk River Joint Board of Control, or not occur rather, the Milk River Joint Board of Control and Reclamation would continue to operate and maintain the St. Mary Canal and its associated infrastructure in its current state. This could cause some issues, as you saw in those previous photos that I showed, of just the issues that the infrastructure is having due to age and deterioration. And so that would be alternative 1. And so if alternative 1 is that future without federal investment, alternatives 2 and 3 we call our modernization alternatives, because these are the future that consider what could happen if federal investment were to occur. Again, I just want to reiterate that the point of the scoping period is to receive public feedback on these actions and on what action should be considered in that plan EIS. And getting this public feedback, and why you're listening to this presentation here today and why I'm recording this presentation, is because this is a crucial piece in order to allow the Milk River Joint Board of Control in order to access that federal funding and potentially make a future like the ones described in alternatives 2 and 3 possible. And so I just wanted to remind us all of that as well. On this slide are some of the proposed measures that have been officially identified as meeting that purpose and need. Again, all of these actions are collectively meeting the purpose and need of the proposed project and are included in these modernization alternatives 2 and 3. But instead of reading all of these just kind of down a list of words on a slide, I would love to go to this next bit, which is a figure of alternative 2 itself. And so I totally understand this map can be a bit hard to see. It covers a vast geographic area, but I'm going to go through this figure with you all and kind of go through the different facets and the different measures that are included in these alternatives. Okay, so let's do it. So the first piece of infrastructure that I want to go over is going to be the siphons. So these are the lime green kind of lines you see here on the figure. There are 3, so the Kennedy siphon, St. Mary's siphon, and Halls Cooley siphon. Just as a reminder for folks, a siphon is a large metal pipe or pipes that move water over a distance, and oftentimes they're used to move water uphill. This is especially the case in the St. Mary's siphon. Under the proposed project, these would just be updated and replaced. All right, so moving on to the drop structures, these are seen in the red pentagon up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. So you can see that there are 5 drops at the end of the system of the St. Mary Canal. Drops 2 and 5 were replaced in 2020 after a catastrophic failure of drop 5, but that leaves 1, 3, and 4 that would be updated under this proposed action or proposed project. And so again, the ones that would be updated are shown in those red pentagons. All right, next we have the O&M road improvements. So the O&M road is shown by that orange line that follows the canal all the way from the beginning of the canal intake to the drop 5 end of the canal. The O&M road is essential to accessing, operating, and maintaining the St. Mary Canal infrastructure, and it's really old, and so makes it difficult in order to be able to appropriately maintain and easily maintain this infrastructure. And so under the proposed project, the road would be widened to 12 feet and would just be improved and updated. Next, we have turnouts and drain replacements. As a reminder, so normally turnouts would be a term that would be used to talk about water being turned out or diverted from a canal in order to make a delivery to a user or a patron. But just as a reminder for the St. Mary's Canal, there's actually no water or turnouts that are delivered directly off of the canal to an irrigator or a patron. The canal is solely used to transport water from the St. Mary River to the Milk River. And so when we use the word turnouts in this project and in this case, it's more akin to a drain. And so these terms will kind of be used interchangeably, and a drain just being a way for the Milk River Joint Board of Control and Reclamation to kind of spill a little bit of water from the canal when needed. Again, under the proposed project, these would just be updated and replaced. All right, next we have wasteways. These are shown on the figure in those small black triangles. These are canals that are used to drain excess water from the St. Mary's Canal. The project would replace the Kennedy Creek and Hall Cooley wasteways with improved structures, and they would also install 9 new side channel spillway structures as well. Next, we have our culverts, which are shown by the circles divided between red and black. These are just tunnels that carry water under a road or railroad. And again, these would just be updated and replaced as part of the project. Next, we have the grassed spillways, which are the squares that are divided between red and black. Grass spillways are just grassed waterways that will help to spill excess water from the St. Mary Canal in the case of flooding, and they're grassed just to prevent erosion. Again, these would just be updated and replaced as part of the proposed project. All right, so this brings us to our landslides. So these are shown by red circles. There should be 16 landslide areas over the course of this infrastructure. And these are just areas where landslides are threatening, or sliding earth is threatening the infrastructure. It's threatening the integrity of the canal or of siphons themselves. And it's also just potentially has potential to cause future issues for the ability to deliver water via the St. Mary Canal in the future. And so under the proposed project, we're looking at potentially 3 different methods in order to stabilize these land areas and ensure that they're no longer causing danger or harm to the infrastructure. If you're interested in what these methods exactly are, we're happy to connect you with our partners, HDR Engineering, who are working on this project, and they can give you more information about that, but I'm not going to go into that currently. Again, if you have a comment based on the type of methods that you would like us to consider with landslide stabilization, then we are more than happy to receive that comment and consider it when we develop the Plan EIS. All right, so all of these different infrastructure pieces that I just went over, thankfully, are the same between alternative 2 and alternative 3. And I just want to repeat that every single piece of infrastructure I talked about and the action that would occur to modernize it stay consistent. So what would happen to all of them stay consistent between alternative 2 and alternative 3. The main difference between these 2 alternatives is actually what is happening with the canal itself. So for alternative 2, there are 2 distinct actions that would potentially be occurring to the canal. The first would be reshaping the canal, essentially, which is just returning it to more of a trapezoidal shape, maybe raising the sides or the freeboard of the canal as well. And this would occur from where we see the St. Mary Canal intake, begin project, kind of tag there, all the way along the canal to drop 5 or the end of the St. Mary Canal. So the entirety of the canal would be reshaped. The second action is lining. So this alternative under alternative 2 would consider lining from the beginning of the St. Mary Canal all the way to the intake of the St. Mary's siphon. And so you can see that on this figure here in that purple line. What lining is placing a waterproof material along the bed of the canal in order to prevent seepage of water down into the ground. Seepage is a huge issue during this project as a lot of the soils are gravels, and so a lot of water is lost into that seepage piece. And so under this alternative, the canal would be lined in that section in order to prevent that seepage of water and that loss of water in that section of the canal. All right. So here we have alternative 3. Again, just to reiterate, the only way that alternative 3 differs from alternative 2 is in that lining is not considered. And I just want to repeat that again, that lining, any part of the canal would not be considered under alternative 3, and the only action related to the canal that would be considered under alternative 3 would to be reshape the entire canal, again from that St. Mary Canal intake to the end of drop 5, the entirety of the canal under the case of alternative 3. But again, the Plan EIS, while a huge part of it is to communicate about these potential actions that could be taken to modernize the St. Mary Canal, another huge part of it is evaluating how those potential actions could affect the resources around the infrastructure. And so that brings us to these resources to be analyzed. So these are just a subset or kind of some examples of resources that will be and could be analyzed in the Plan EIS. So we would look at, how the proposed actions would affect vegetation or wildlife or economic benefits and costs of those actions as well. Additionally, we understand that this project doesn't just serve irrigators, it serves municipalities, it serves wildlife refuges, and so the effects and resources related to those entities as well will be analyzed and considered, as well as those that are important to irrigators and conservationists. All right, so this brings us to the kind of the point of this recording and the point of this presentation, or the opportunity for you, the public, to submit a comment. Here are some example comments. So maybe you have a thought or an idea about how these actions are going to affect your day-to-day life. So how will they affect your irrigation deliveries or the way that you are able to use your land? These are valid comments. Maybe you have a comment regarding what is included in the alternatives, the actual actions. So you might have a question about, why did you only consider lining a portion of the canal? What about lining the entire canal? Or various actions related to that. You might have suggestions, or you might be dubious of some actions that were potentially proposed today. And so we want to hear your thoughts and your comments about those as well. And finally, we want to hear your thoughts about those resources that have the potential to be affected. In this example comment here, the individual is concerned about the effects of the project on the wildlife in their area. And so they're wondering if the Plain EIS will study the effects of the project on wildlife. Any resource is valid, and we want to hear from you about what the specific resources that you are concerned about and would like evaluated throughout the process of us developing this draft Plain EIS. Again, this is really early on in the process, and so this is a really unique opportunity to be able to speak into the content that will be and analyses that will be included in this draft Plain EIS prior to the public comment period. There are so many ways to submit comments, so if you're listening to this recording, you probably weren't able to show up to a meeting in person, and that is completely fine. We have many ways to submit comments, the first being online. Next, we have you can submit via email, via phone, or via physical mail, all with these details here. I just want to reiterate that the scoping period will end on August 7th of this year, and so you have the opportunity to submit a comment up until that date. I just want to thank you all for listening. I know it is a really busy time of the year, and although maybe you couldn't make it out to a public in-person meeting, we really appreciate even you taking the time to listen to this recording. And again, we just want to reiterate, me on behalf of the Milk River Joint Board of Control, NRCS, Reclamation, HDR, and also my organization, FCA, we want to hear your comments and we want to hear your feedback. And so we thank you so much for your time, and we hope to see your comments.